Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Sheila Buswell. She's an engineer, founder, and author with degrees in mechanical and biomedical engineering. She also co-founded Buswell Biomedical, with the company's first product being the Upward Mobility, a device that helps people walk and transition from sitting to standing. And I mentioned she's also an author. The name of her book is This Seat for Me? Overcoming Imposter Syndrome in Everyday Life and Business. So let's get into why she chose engineering, the motivation for founding her company, and the reason behind writing her book. And I'm sure we'll get into public speaking as well. Welcome to Teach the Geek interview, Sheila.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks for having me.
So I mentioned that you studied mechanical and biomedical engineering. What was the motivation to get those degrees?
So I had a scholarship out of high school, which I lost subsequently. But initially, engineering was just like, oh, with a bachelor's degree, you can make X amount of money. And at 18, I don't know how people decide this is what I'm passionate about or whatever, but I definitely didn't. It was very practical. I lost that scholarship and I joined the military. And I don't know, mechanical engineering is a lot of thermodynamics and heat transfer. I did the practical side that a lot of people have growing up. I didn't like I learned how to turn a wrench and I learned how to what flooding an engine meant practically, besides looking at a chart on a heat transfer chart or a thermodynamics chart um, from a mechanic's point of view first, which I wouldn't have had that experience previously.
Oh, wow. And then what about for biomedical engineering? Why'd you go into that?
So on my career journey, I ended up making spinal implants and instruments. And I thought it was just really interesting how material wise human body is so different. And I was vastly interested in how implantable devices and materials changed in this realm. And that's my interest went down that path.
All right. So now you get these couple of degrees. Well, I'm actually kind of curious. What kind of work did you do when you worked as an engineer?
For the most part, I did R&D and automating, research and development and automation.
Okay, great. And then at some point you decided to start your own business. So what was the motivation to start Buswell Biomedical?
So it's a long story, but when I was in the military, I was deployed to Bosnia where I was injured in an accident. A generator fell on my foot, and I was in a rehab hospital in 1998 in Bosnia. And 20 years later, my mom fell in Arizona and she was in a rehab hospital for 3 weeks. In those intervening 20 years, I had gotten engineering degrees and worked for a lot of great companies. But when I physically saw my mom in a rehab hospital struggling with basically the same problems that I had, like for the activities of daily living, you have to be accompanied by an entourage of healthcare workers, depending on your size. It's the size of your entourage. It could be one person, it could be many people, or if you're too big, it could be you're restricted to adult diapers. But this was a solution I had only in 1998 as a female in a military facility that was a UN hospital. I had a dedicated nursing staff. There wasn't that many women, right? So there's a lot of women nurses. That wasn't the case for my mom. In 2018, it's even fewer healthcare workers now. So I invented a device that's mechanical in nature. Like there's a frame that's mechanical, but it's the control system is artificial intelligence, machine learning, and sensors. And it allows people to conduct these activities of daily living independently, preventing a potential fall. So that aha, it wasn't like an aha moment. It was like problem solving, and I had intimate knowledge of the problem and being on both sides of it, as the person who needed to be how horrible it was to have a witness there for all the activities of daily living, like toileting. And just seeing my mom struggle with something that I thought could be preventable. And because I spent a lot of time doing automation of manual tasks, I knew that this was something that could be done and make everybody safer as a result. So, yeah,
Wonderful.
I think
What's one thing about starting a business that you didn't anticipate at the beginning?
A lot of the lessons I learned were great, but one was really harsh, and that was that engineering is not the most important part of a business. Like all the parts are important, but like the business foundations and structures are important, probably more important than product design. And initially I thought, oh, you'll build it and it's a need, they'll come. And that's not necessarily true, or that's not true. Just blatantly not true. There's a reason for marketing, there's a reason for business. And as an engineer, I thought business math was really hard. I was elitist in that. And it was like, business math is hard too, but it's hard for a different reason. Like the math itself is easy, but none of the numbers are firm. It's all variable, and you have to be a good educated guesser to pick the right numbers.
Yeah, I remember when I was in undergrad, I did a course, I think my first year in, I think, business math. And you're right. It wasn't, the math wasn't that difficult, but the use of it and remembering all was actually not that easy. And I remember not doing all that well in that course, actually.
Oh, and as an engineer, it's scary to just pick. What do you mean pick a number? I need a chart, I need to extrapolate, I need to something. Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to it that's, all the parts matter.
I also mentioned in the intro that you wrote a book. What was the motivation to write your book?
So when I started my business, I started the business in well, April 19th, 2019. But I started pitching the business in 2020. And it was difficult to be seen not as the idea or the business. It was like, oh, this person that happens to have exclusively X chromosomes. And it felt like a battle I had been fighting, and I was just tired. And um, for the idea of be a book judged by a cover wasn't new to me, but I realized that a lot of people have that problem. And um, I wanted to first write the book about that. And then it was a journey, 2-year journey to write the book. But I found out that there was more people who had this problem, and that it's called different things when different people have it, depending on what that person looks like. So yeah, I don't know if I answer your question there, but yeah, that was basically my idea, is to convey that, yeah, it's a monster everybody has under their closet. Their monster might look different, but my motivation was that it's not just women or, engineers that have this problem.
What do you hope people get from your book after reading it?
I would like the book is right here, is the seat for me. Simply a practical way. First of all, I want to convey that if you have imposter syndrome, which most people do, you're not alone, and a practical way to tackle it. I offer 5 personal solutions and 2 cultural solutions. 5 personal solutions when you are, I don't want to say attacked, but when you experience this self-doubt, ways to overcome it. Because your brain is meant to keep you safe, not to make you try new things. And I mean, life is about trying new things. So, unless you want to stay in your house all day, which, you lose by default, then, or you fail by default, then brain is going to be like working against you. So this is a way to convince yourself you belong where you are.
Nice. Yeah, I suspect there's a lot of people out there that have issues with self-doubt and trying to figure out ways to get over it. It certainly is well, it's beneficial to them. So if they have some sort of resource to help them in doing so, that's better than not having one at all. So I'm glad that you wrote your book. Also, for the people out there who are listening or watching this conversation, Sheila, and they have aspirations to write their own book, what advice could you give them?
Just start. Like for me, I started multiple times, but I think I listen to a lot of podcasts about book writing, and they just say 250 words a day, which is like a page. And that adds up after, but people want perfection, and that fear of perfection or fear of not having something perfect keeps people from starting. And I think if you have something and you just make a atomic habit style, like James Clear says, just do a little bit every day and it adds up, makes a huge change.
I often wonder if people would even recognize perfection if it was in front of them.
Or if it would be so boring if you met this perfect person or you were this perfect person. Like, I'm in my late 40s now, and I'm like, I don't want perfect in my life. Like, my scholarship was engineering that I lost, was engineering 3.8 GPA. I'm like, oh my gosh, it would be very few people who could be well-rounded and have that, maintain that GPA. I don't know, in engineering. I don't know. I mean,
No, engineering isn't easy, that's for sure. It's more of about trying to get through it than really what the grade is, as far as I'm concerned.
right. And then do you want to, that person that could get through it, do you want to meet them at the coffee maker or the water cooler? Do you want to have that conversation? Do you want to be stuck at the airport? No. I mean, I don't know. Very minority of the people where you're like, you'd rather have a human person that makes mistakes. And
It's really interesting you're mentioning this, Sheila, because I'm trying to think of all the people that I went to school with and the ones that did really well and the ones who didn't do all that well, or at least, they got through it, where they all end up. And it seems that they all ended up somewhere where they're comfortable being. So it's not as if, getting this high GPA is the guarantee that you're going to end up where you want to end up. Because I know people that got through it and they still ended up where they wanted to end up. It's all about, well, firstly, getting the degree, and then also building relationships with people, because over time, no one cares about what your GPA is anyway.
yeah, I have never been asked what my GPA is. Like, seriously, people want to make sure that I have degrees or I have like past tests or whatever, but like nobody has ever asked what my GPA was. I did lose a scholarship in the 90s because I didn't maintain a GPA, but in a professional setting, nobody has asked me what my GPA is.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Especially the further away you get from graduating, and you're 20 years away from 20 years past graduating, and someone's asking you your GPA, it's just like, why? You're focused on the wrong thing, buddy. That's
Yep.
for sure. All right. So, when I first started this podcast and YouTube channel, Sheila, it was about the public speaking journey of people with technical backgrounds, and it still is. But it all started with myself and me having difficulty giving presentations in front of management. I used to work in medical devices. I had to give presentations on a monthly basis in front of senior management, and those presentations, at least early on, were absolutely atrocious. I this is the best way to describe it. I didn't know it was possible to sweat that profusely from one's body. You would have thought I would have prepared better, but I didn't. I would just get slides together as quickly as I could. I'd read the slides and try to get out there as quickly as possible. I realized that wasn't the way to go once my project got canceled. And this happened 15 years ago at this point, maybe even more than that now. But looking back on it, if I had just been better at communicating the importance of the project to senior management, well, maybe I could have saved the project, but I suppose we'll never know. When it comes to speaking for yourself, is that something you've always been good at? And if not, what did you do to get better at it?
Is definitely not something I was good at. And so I think this is a military thing. They talk about sharpening your sword, or like I've heard it sharpening your saw. It's probably more applicable to me. But I was like, I knew my communication wasn't great. So I started in college doing Toastmasters. And I do think that's a good way. I think podcast guesting has helped a lot because I've gotten used to answering questions and you answer them briefly for a large audience. Whereas, like, when I would give presentations, it would be long and technical for engineers. You'd have to have an engineering degree to hear my answers initially. And I am not sure the best way to communicate is more, right? And to use technical jargon and to use technical answers. But it took a good 15 years of hard work. And to be told, oh my gosh, you need to work on your communication.
Well, at least someone was willing to be honest with you as opposed to telling you what you wanted to hear. Yeah, I fully agree with podcast guesting being an excellent way to practice speaking because what it does is, especially if you don't get the questions beforehand, it forces you to be a good listener. And I think to be a good communicator, you have to be an active listener. And then it also helps you in being more comfortable as answering questions that you weren't prepared for. So as you well, you know that I didn't send you the questions I was going to ask you before this conversation. So you're just answering them in real time. In fact, I've done a number of interviews at this point. I think I have over 300 episodes, and for a handful of them early on, I would send the questions because the person asked me to. And let me tell you, those interviews were probably some of the more boring interviews that I had because all you're getting is rehearsed answers. I just remember thinking to myself, I hate this. I don't want to do this ever again. But it benefits the person that's being interviewed because, as I said, you get to practice answering questions extemporaneously. And that's a great skill to have, not just doing a podcast interview, but certainly for someone like yourself who has to pitch a business, you're getting questions from the people that you're speaking to that you didn't prepare for. You didn't know what they're going to ask you. So you have to be in the moment. You got to listen well. You got to be comfortable in, answering these type of questions. So podcast guesting is really a good idea. And then also your point about minimizing the jargon. That's such an interesting one too. So I think a lot of us as engineers are just technical people. We just get so used to it that we just assume that other people know what these words mean. But then when you're in a position where when you're listening to somebody use words that you don't know, then it becomes very clear to you that this is an issue. But when you're doing it, you're not even thinking about it. I find it really interesting.
That's true. That is 100% true.
Yeah. Well, we all gotta learn. We're all works in progress. No one's perfect. All right. So when it comes to the presentations that you do you have a process for putting them together? And if so, what is it?
I like to practice. Even though I like questions and spontaneity, I like to know what I'm going to say. And that's with everything. I like to have a plan. That plan can go to shit right away, right? Like Mike Tyson says, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? And I've been figuratively punched in the face. I have siblings, so I have been like literally punched in the face, not just by my siblings, but like I was in the military too. I was punched in the face, literally. But I think even if I have a plan and I know what milestones need to be met for success to be achieved, I feel better, but I practice. So I recently gave a talk. Tech STL had a tech week, and I gave a talk about not fearing AI. And there was things I wanted to talk about. Now, to your point, I'm better at answering questions because of my podcast guesting. I got questions I could not have anticipated, but I was better at responding to those. But I think it's important I practiced and I knew what I wanted to cover to make that. So that's my process. I make the speed, I make the basic points I want to cover. I am big on, I know the points, but I'm big on pictures and little on words on the presentation. But when I make a speech, I am big on words, but not, you don't need an engineering degree anymore to listen to me.
I'm sure the people who don't have engineering degrees, they are happy that they don't need to have that degree to listen to you, because that could be just a painful experience. I also agree with having more pictures and less text on slides. And the main reason is, well, it serves a couple of purposes. For the person who's presenting, they don't have that crutch of being able to look at the slides to read. Because when you're looking at the slides, now you're not looking at the people. And if you're not looking at the people, then it's a good chance they're not looking at you. And if they're not looking at you, they're probably not listening to you either. They're probably doing everything else but listening to you. But then also for the people who are in the audience, it's difficult to read and listen at the same time. So if you have very little text on the slide, well, you've eliminated that option for them to read a slide. They're either going to listen to you or ignore you. And hopefully you're engaging enough for them to listen to you.
Yes, agreed. And the worst possible presentations I have ever experienced is when somebody reads a slide to me. Like I I think during the Steve Jobs book, he talks about just like unplugging computers or doing something obnoxious. And I'm like, the only time I can identify with him doing that is when somebody reads to me on a slide. Like that angers me on a level I cannot articulate, but I'm like, if I could get you off the stage, I would.
A couple of months ago, I went to a conference, and the majority of the presenters were students, grad students, and there were some professors as well, all academics in engineering. And the amount of slide reading was just, it was impeccable. It was just like one after the other, just reading the slides. I remember thinking to myself, the majority of the people in the audience, they probably can read, I suspect. So you reading the slides isn't really helpful to them. So why don't you minimize the amount of words on the slide, perhaps have those pictures instead, and then speak to the pictures that likely speak to the presentation. But so often we just have this crutch of just we need to put all this information on the slide and just read the slides and think that that's a good idea. And looking back on it now and other presentations and other conferences I've gone to, especially the ones that are more academic in nature, I find that a lot of the presenters, they're there not to give an effective presentation. They're there because it's something to put on their CV. They presented at this conference. And it's so unfortunate because there's a missed opportunity to really have people understand what you're talking about and be excited about it, and be interested in it. But you're just looking for a line item on a CV. It's a shame.
My master's thesis was like, I presented my work, right? But I was put on after somebody from the Sorbonne. And I was like, oh my goodness. I was in my head, talk about imposter syndrome. But I was like, I can't possibly go after this guy. He's going to be so much smarter, but he did exactly what you're talking about. And he was a line on the CV was all he was trying to get. And he was boring to listen to. And I was animated. And I had gone through Toastmasters as we talked about being in college. And I was like, much better than him because I could explain it more. Even people with engineering degrees don't want to be talked to like engineers all the time. So I think there's a lot to be learned. I think school today more emphasizes the ability to make presentations. I think if you graduate in 2024, you're going to be better at that because it is more of an important skill that's emphasized. But I think it's not one that everybody has.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly didn't learn that when I was in undergrad. And kudos to you for doing Toastmasters when you were in college. I didn't even know about Toastmasters back then. And even looking back on it, I'm not even sure if I would have done it. I would still been so concerned about passing all my classes that the idea of doing Toastmasters would have probably been the furthest thing from my mind. So again, I commend you for doing it. So now,
Thank you.
oh yeah, so Sheila, you are a presenter. You speak to people. But before you speak to people, I'm curious, do you get nervous? And if so, how do you deal with your nerves?
I absolutely get nervous, but I give myself pep talks. And we talked before about how like I think of it as advocating for basically for the most part, I talk about my business or I gave a talk on AI and I'm like, so my business uses machine learning AI, right? And I would talk to people about that and they're like, they hear AI and they think the Terminator. They don't think Big Hero 6. So, because they have this fear. So I gave a talk on Tech Week about not fearing artificial intelligence. So I was like, no, I'm advocating for this and I want people to fear it less. And I am big into people need to engage and this will eliminate biases. Because if we have the same people creating this software or this advancements, it's going to have the same inherent issues that our society has had for the last 40 years or, forever. But if we have a large segment of the society, like my mom thinks, oh, it's evil. She doesn't want to engage. And, that's silly to me. So I think it's important that that's talked about. So yes, I am scared. I am nervous about everything, but I think it's important. And that trumps it. And I don't think of it as being nervous. I think of it as being excited, but that pep talk kind of helps. But if you ask me to talk about like, I don't know, mascara or something, I'm going to be scared.
I'd be scared too. I have no clue. That's great. You know, what you mentioned your mother. I'm thinking, I wonder if my mother's scared of AI. It certainly wouldn't surprise me considering she still uses an address book,
Yep.
a physical address book. I keep telling her you can put all these people's names into the phone, but she won't do it. And she has pages falling out. And she got little tabs all over the damn place. I was like, come on, man. You've had this thing since the 90s. You can do better, but she just won't.
Yep. No, I know. I think we have the same mom. I don't know.
That'd be interesting if we did. This has been a great conversation, Sheila. Thank you so much for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
The easiest way is the website is the seat for me, www.istheseatforme.com. And you enter in your information. It just asks your name and your email, and we'll start an email conversation. You also get a free chapter of the book, but it allows us to just start a conversation. And I keep an eye on that email address myself. So it's me. It's not like a third party, right? So we talk.
Right, it's not AI yet. Okay, wonderful. Well, everyone, this marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Sheila.
Thank you, Neil.